Hi, and welcome back to the City of Ember. We are on Chapter 4, and the packet should be in your Google Classroom. It should be there as both a PDF file and a Google Doc. You can open either one. They're the exact same. So that way, format-wise, if you have a hard time with Google Docs or with PDF files, you've got something that still works. This is Mrs. Martin, and we're going to go through Chapters 4 and 5 together today. So let's see what happens. When we left things, Lena was pretty happy with her job. She was aware that there are problems in Ember, but she was more focused on the fact that she has this freedom and independence that comes with being treated like an adult. And having a job certainly makes you more independent and more adult-like. Dune, on the other hand, was kind of crushed by his first day at work. He recognizes that Ember is in far more disrepair than he ever imagined. And it's upsetting to him because he's a problem solver. He wants to get things done. And he's in a position where he's not entirely sure that can happen. So, Chapter 4 brings us back to Lena's perspective. Let's start here. Something lost, nothing found. One day when Lena had been a messenger for several weeks, she came home to find Granny had thrown all the cushions from the couch onto the floor, ripped up a corner of the couch's lining, and was pulling out wads of stuffing. "What are you doing?" Lena cried. Granny looked up. Wisps of sofa stuffing stuck to the front of her dress and clung to her hair. "Something is lost," she said. "I think it might be in here." "What's lost, Granny?" "I don't quite recall," said the old woman. "Something important." "But Granny, you're ruining the couch. What will we sit on?" Granny tore a bit more of the covering off the couch and yanked out another puff of stuffing. "It doesn't matter," she said. "I'll put it back together later." "Let's put it back now," Lena said. "I don't think what's lost is in there." "You don't know," said Granny darkly, but she sat back on her heels, looking tired. Lena began cleaning up the mess. Now, I'm going to pause here just because we haven't talked about Granny yet, except to say that Granny's getting forgetful. We want to make sure that we note that she's looking for something, but she doesn't know what it is, okay? She doesn't recall. So this is important because it's showing us that while Lena's at work, Granny may not be the most reliable person at home to run the yarn shop or to look after Poppy. And sure enough, that's what we find out. Lena began cleaning up the mess. "Where's the baby?" she asked. Granny gazed at Lena blankly. "The baby? That's not good." "You haven't forgotten the baby." "Oh, yes, I think she's down in the shop." "By herself?" Lena stood up and ran down the stairs. She found Poppy sitting on the floor of the shop enmeshed in a tangle of yellow yarn. As soon as she saw Lena, Poppy began to howl. So we've got a really good word there, enmeshed, which context clues will tell you she's all tangled up in yarn. And like a lot of kids, they're really not sure how to react until they see your reaction. If you've ever seen like a toddler fall down, they'll look at the adults around them like, should I cry? Should I not cry? And that's kind of what Poppy's doing here. She sees Lena, who looks panicked, and she starts to cry because she realizes there's something not right with sitting by yourself in a ball of yarn. Lena picked her up and unwound the yarn, talking soothingly, though she was so upset that her fingers trembled. That's a nice note, right? For Granny to forget the baby was dangerous. Poppy could fall downstairs and hurt herself. She could wander out into the street and get lost. Granny had been forgetful lately, but this was the first time she had completely forgotten about Poppy. So in your character chart for Granny Mayfleet, you're going to need to add that she had completely forgotten about Poppy. And you can add to Lena that Lena is upset and shocked by this because it's never happened before. When they got upstairs, Granny was kneeling on the floor, gathering up the white tufts of stuffing and jamming them back into the hole she'd made in the couch. "It wasn't in there," she said sadly. "What wasn't?" It was lost a long time ago, said Granny. My father told me about it. Lena sighed impatiently. More and more, her grandmother's mind seemed caught in the past. She could explain the rules of Pebble Jacks, which she'd played last when she was 8, or tell you what happened at the singing when she was 12, or who she danced with at the Clothing Square dance when she was 16, but she would forget what had happened the day before yesterday. So the last time we looked at Granny, she was forgetful, and we kind of knew that, but because she'd forgotten that Lena was a messenger, that she was going to become a messenger at school that day, right? That she was going to get a job. But this is even worse. This hints at something that we do have in our society today. Alzheimer's disease works a lot like this, and dementia. And we've talked in the past during the brain unit about different types of memory. You have short-term memory, you have long-term memory, and you have working memory. And so when you have somebody who can remember the past, but she would forget what had happened the day before yesterday, that means her long-term memory is intact. That part of her memory is fine. But the ability to take short-term memory and convert it while she sleeps into long-term memory is not happening. And so that's part of these diseases which we deal with in our society today. And I think I've shared with you in the past, I had 2 grandmothers, both of whom were diagnosed with dementia. And this is exactly the kind of thing that they would experience, where they would remember really specific details from the past, but not anything very recent. They heard him talking about it when he died, she said to Lena. They heard who talking? My grandfather, the 7th mayor. Ooh, do you remember what I remember? The 7th mayor of Ember. What was his deal? What was his story? Do you remember? The 7th mayor was the one who took the box with the instructions out of the gathering hall. Remember, he had an illness he thought could be cured by what's in the box. So the thing that's so important that Granny's looking for is this box, right? But Granny doesn't know she's looking for the box. She doesn't know what's in the box. All she knows is that her grandfather lost something, and he was talking about it right before he died. So now it's bothering her, which seems very random to Lena and to us, right? So, question to you, where do you think the box is? Think about what you visualized, what you pictured in your head when we were thinking about Lena's apartment, when it was described for us at the very beginning. And it was described as, I believe I said it was almost like an episode of Hoarders. So just stacks and stacks of stuff. Nobody throws anything away. Those instructions are somewhere in that house. And those instructions are the key to saving this society. So this is a pretty big detail. And what did they hear him say? Said her grandmother with a faraway look. That's the mystery. He said he couldn't get at it. Now it is lost, he said. But what was it? He didn't say. Lena gave up. It didn't matter anyway. Probably the lost thing was the old man's left sock or his hairbrush. But for some reason, the story had taken root in Granny's mind. The next morning on her way to work, Lena stopped in at the house of their neighbor, Eveline Murdo. Mrs. Murdo was brisk in her manner, and in her person thin and straight as a nail, but she was kind in her unsmiling way. So we're going to add Mrs. Murdo to the chart. Straight as a nail is a nice little simile to talk about her being very neat and very fastidious, very, clean. And she's thin, she's kind, but she's unsmiling, so she's serious. Until a few years ago, she had run a shop that sold paper and pencils, but when paper and pencils became scarce, her shop closed. Now, she spent her days sitting up by her upstairs window, watching people in the street with her sharp eyes. Lena told Mrs. Murdo about her grandmother's forgetfulness. "Will you look in on her sometimes and make sure things are all right?" she asked. "I will, certainly," said Mrs. Murdo, nodding twice firmly. Lena went away feeling better. So Lena goes out and seeks help in her community. And because Ember is the only community, right? They're the only people in this world. They have that kind of togetherness, that family bond feel. So even though Mrs. Murdo's not a blood relative, she's somebody that is willing to help out her neighbors. And in this case, Lena certainly needs the help. That day, Lena was given a message by Arbin Swin, who ran the Calais Street vegetable market, to be delivered to Lena's friend Clary, the greenhouse manager. Lena was glad to carry this message, though her gladness was mixed with a little sadness. Her father had worked in the greenhouses. It still felt strange not to see him there. So that's a nice little note to put for Lena, that her father had worked in the greenhouses. Certainly explains how she knows Clary. And Clary is on your character chart, so when we meet her and hear more about her, we'll have to add details. The 5 greenhouses produced all of Ember's fresh food. They were out past Greengate Square at the farthest edge of the city. Nothing else was out there but trash heaps, great smoldering, stinking hills that stood on rocky ground and were lit by a few floodlights high up on poles. It used to be that no one went to the trash heaps but the trash collectors, who dumped the trash and left. Now and then, a couple of children might go there to play, scrambling up the side of the heaps and tumbling down. Lena and Lizzie used to go when they were younger. They'd pull out the occasional treasure, some empty cans, maybe an old hat or a cracked plate, but not anymore. Now there were guards posted at the trash heaps to make sure no one poked around. Just recently, an official job called trash sifter had been created. Every day, a team of people methodically sorted through the trash heaps in search of anything that might be at all useful. They'd come back with broken chair legs that could be used for repairing window frames, bent nails that could become hooks for clothes, even filthy rags stiff with dirt that could be washed out and used to patch holes in window blinds or mattress covers. Lena hadn't thought about it before, but now she wondered about the trash sifters. Were they there because Ember really was running out of everything? So those of you who were assigned the job of trash sifter, I know you were not happy. You responded that way with your emails. I don't think there was a single trash sifter who was thrilled with the job. But you can see where that level of recycling is necessary if you are running out of supplies, right? So this is a society that's trying to learn new habits in order to sustain themselves longer. Beyond the trash heaps, there was nothing at all. That is, only the vast unknown regions where the darkness was absolute. From the end of Diggory Street, Lena could see the long, low greenhouses. They looked like big tin cans that had been cut in half and laid on their sides. Her breath came a little faster. The greenhouses were a home to her in a way. She knew that she would most likely find Clary somewhere around Greenhouse 1, where the office was. So that was where she headed first. A small tool shed stood beside the door to Greenhouse 1. Lena peeked into it, but saw only rakes and shovels. So she opened the greenhouse door. Warm, furry-smelling air washed over her, and all her love for this place came rushing back. Out of habit, she gazed up toward the ceiling as if she might see her father there on his ladder, tinkering with the sprinkler system, the temperature gauges, and the lights. The greenhouse light was whiter than the yellowish light of Ember street lamps. It came from long tubes that ran the length of the ceiling. In this light, the leaves of the plants shone so green that they almost hurt Lena's eyes. On the days when she'd come here with her father, Lena had spent hours wandering along the gravel paths that ran between the vegetable beds, sniffing the leaves, poking her fingers into the dirt, and learning to tell the plants apart by their look and smell. There were the beans and peas with their curly tendrils, the dark green spinach, the ruffled lettuce, and the hard, pale green cabbages, some of them as big as a newborn baby's head. What she loved best was to rub the leaves of the tomato plant between her fingers and breathe in their pungent, powdery smell. A long, straight path led from one end of the building to the other. About halfway down the path, Clary was crouching by a bed of carrots. Lena ran toward her and Clary smiled, brushing the dirt from her hands, and stood up. Clary was tall and solid, with big hands and knobby knuckles. She had a square jaw and square shoulders, and brown hair cut in a short, squarish way. You might have thought from looking at her that she was a gruff, unfriendly person, but her nature was just the opposite. She was more comfortable with plants than with people. Lena's father had always said. She was strong but shy, a person of much knowledge but few words. Lena had always liked her, even when she was little. Clary did not treat her like a baby, but gave her jobs to do, pulling up carrots, picking bugs off of cabbages. Since her parents had died, Lena had come many times to talk to Clary, or just to work silently beside her. Clary was always kind to her, and working with the plants took Lena's mind off of her grief. So, for Clary, we're going to add that she's tall and solid, has big hands, knobby knuckles, square jaw, square shoulders, short brown hair. Looks unfriendly, right? Looking unfriendly, but really the opposite. She's more comfortable with plants than people. And did not treat Lena like a baby. So this person seems like a really nice, almost like an aunt figure, somebody who's older than Lena who can help advise her and give her some support and ideas, right? Well, Clary said. She smiled at Lena, wiped her hands on her already grimy pants, and smiled some more. Finally, she said, "You're a messenger." So if you don't know what grimy means, that would be a good vocabulary word to grab for this time around. "Yes," said Lena, "and I have a message for you. It's from Arbin Swin. Please add 4 extra crates to my order, 2 of potatoes and 2 of cabbages." Clary frowned. "I can't do that," she said. "At least I can send him the cabbages, but only 1 small crate of potatoes." "Why?" asked Lena. "Well, we have sort of a problem with the potatoes." "What is it?" asked Lena. Clary had a habit of answering questions in the briefest way possible. You had to keep asking and asking before she would believe you really wanted to know and weren't just being polite. Then she would explain, and you could see how much she knew and how much she loved her work. "I'll show you," she said. She led the way to a bed where the green leaves were spotted with black. "A new disease. I haven't seen it before. When you dig up the potatoes, they're runny inside instead of hard, and they stink. I'm going to have to throw out all the ones in this bed. There are only a few beds left that aren't infected. Most people in Ember had potatoes at every meal, mashed, boiled, stewed, roasted. They'd had fried potatoes, too, in the days before cooking oil ran out." "I'd hate if we couldn't have potatoes anymore," Lena said. "I would, too," said Clary. They sat on the edge of the potato bed and talked for a while about Lena's grandmother and the baby, about the trouble Clary was having with the beehives, and about the greenhouse sprinkler system. "It hasn't worked right since—" Clary hesitated and glanced sideways at Lena. "For a long time," she said. She didn't want to say, "since your father died." Lena understood that. She stood up. "I should go," she said. "I have to take Arbin Swin the answer to his message." "I hope you'll come again," said Clary. "You can come whenever. You can come anytime." Lena said thank you and turned to go. But just outside the greenhouse door, she heard running footsteps and a high, strange, sobbing sound. Or rather, she heard sobs and then a wail, sobs and then a shout, and then more sobs getting louder. She looked back toward the rear of the greenhouses, toward the trash heaps. "Clary?" she called. "There's something—" Clary came out and listened too. Do you hear it?" "Yes," said Clary. She frowned. "I'm afraid it's someone who—" She peered through the crying noise, toward the crying noise. "Yes, here he comes." Her strong hand gripped Lena's shoulder for a moment. "You'd better go," she said. "I'll take care of this." "But what is it?" "Never mind, just go on." But Lena wanted to see. Once Clary had walked away, she ducked behind the tool shed. From there, she watched. The noise came closer. Out beyond the trash heaps, a figure appeared. It was a man, running and stumbling, his arms flopping. He looked as if he were about to fall over, as if he could hardly pick up his feet. In fact, as he came closer, he did fall. He tripped over a hose and crumpled to the ground as if his bones had dissolved. Clary stooped down and said something to him in a voice too low for Lena to hear. The man was panting. When he turned over and sat up, Lena saw that his face was scratched and his eyes opened wide in fright. His sobs had turned into hiccups. She recognized him. It was Sage Merrill, one of the clerks in the supply depot. He was a quiet, long-faced man who always looked worried. Clary helped him to his feet. The two of them came slowly toward the greenhouse, and as they got closer, Lena could hear what the man was saying. He spoke very fast in a weak, trembly voice, hardly stopping to breathe. I was sure I could do it. I said to myself, just one step after another, that's all, just one step after another. I knew it would be dark. Who doesn't know that? But I thought, well, dark can't hurt you. I'll just keep going, I thought. He stumbled and sagged against Clary. Careful, Clary said. They reached the door of the greenhouse, and Clary struggled to open it. Without thinking, Lena darted out from behind the tool shed and opened it for her. Clary shot her a quick frown, but said nothing. Sage didn't stop talking. But then the farther I went, the darker it was, and you can't just keep walking in the black dark, can you? It's like a wall in front of you. I kept turning around to look at the lights of the city because that's all there was to see, and I'd say to myself, don't look back, keep moving, but I kept tripping and falling, and the ground is rough out there. I scraped my hands. He held up one and stared at the red scratches on it, which oozed drops of blood. They got him into Clary's office and sat him down in her chair. He rambled on. Be brave, I said to myself. I kept going and going, but then all of a sudden I thought, anything could be out there. There could be a pit 1,000 feet deep right in front of me. There could be something that bites. I've heard stories, rats as big as garbage bins. And I had to get out of there. So I turned and I ran. Never mind, said Clary. You're all right now. Lena, get him some water. Lena found a cup and filled it from the sink in the corner. Sage took it with a shaking hand and drank it down. What were you looking for? Lena asked. She knew what she would have been looking for if she'd gone out there. She thought about it countless times. Sage stared at her. He seemed to have to puzzle over her question, and finally he said, I was looking for something that could help us. What would it be? I don't know. Like a stairway that leads somewhere maybe, or a building full of, I don't know, useful things. But you didn't find anything or see anything? Lena asked, disappointed. Nothing. There is nothing out there. His voice became a shout, and his eyes looked wild again. Or, if there is, we can never get to it. Never. Not without a light. He took a long, shaky breath. For a while, he stared at the floor. Then he stood up. I think I'm all right now. I'll be going. With uncertain steps, he went down the path and out the door. Well, said Clary, I'm sorry that happened while you were here. I was afraid you might be scared, and that's why I told you to go. But Lena was full of questions, not fear. She had heard tales of people who tried to get into the unknown regions. She had thought about it herself. In fact, she wondered the same things as Sage. She had imagined making her way into the dark and coming to a wall in which she would find the door to a tunnel. At the end of the tunnel would be the other city, the city of light that she had dreamed about. All it would take was the courage to walk away from Ember and into the darkness and then keep going. It might have been possible if you could carry a light to show you the way. But in Ember, there was no such thing as a light that you could carry with you. Outside lights were fixed to their poles or to the roofs of houses. Inside lights were set in the ceiling or had cords that had to be plugged in. Over the course of Ember's history, various clever people tried to invent a movable light, but all of them had failed. One man had managed to ignite the end of a stick of wood by holding it against an electric burner on his stove. He'd run across the city with the flaming stick, planning to use it to light his journey, but by the time he got to the trash heaps, his torch had gone out. Other people latched on to this idea. One woman who lived on Deadlock Street, very near the edge of the city, managed to get into the unknown regions with her flaming stick, but the stick burned out quickly, and before she'd go far, the flame singed her hands and she threw it down. Everyone who had tried to penetrate the unknown regions had come back within a few hours, their enterprise a failure. There's a great word, enterprise. It's not just a ship from Star Trek, my dears. If you don't know what it is, look it up. Lena and Clary stood by the open door of the greenhouse and watched Sage shuffle toward the city. As he neared the trash heaps, 2 guards who had been sitting on the ground got to their feet. They walked over to Sage, and each of them took hold of one of his arms. "Uh-oh," said Clary. "Those guards are always looking for trouble." "But Sage hasn't broken any law," said Lena. "It doesn't matter. They need something to do. They'll get some fun out of scaring him." One of the guards was shaking his finger at Sage and saying something in a voice almost loud enough for Lena to hear. "Poor man," said Clary with a sigh. "He's the 4th one this year." The guards were marching Sage away now, one on either side of him. Sage looked limp and small between them. "What do you think is out in the unknown regions, Clary?" Clary stared down at the ground where the light from the greenhouses was casting long, thin shadows of both of them. "I don't know. Nothing, I guess." "Do you think Ember is really the only light in the dark world?" Clary sighed. "I don't know," she said. She gave Lena a long look. Her eyes, Lena thought, looked a little sad. They were a deep brown, almost the color of the earth in the garden bed. Clary put a hand in her pocket and drew something out. "Look," she said. In the palm of her hand was a white bean. "Something in this seed knows how to make a bean plant." "How does it know that?" "I don't know," said Lena, staring at the hard, flat bean. "It knows because it has life in it," said Clary. "But where does life come from? What is life?" Lena could see the words were welling up in Clary now. Her eyes were bright, her cheeks were rosy. Take a lamp, for instance. When you plug it in, it comes alive in a way. It lights up. That's because it's connected to a wire that's connected to the generator, which is making electricity. Though don't ask me how. But a bean seed isn't connected to anything. And neither are people. We don't have plugs and wires that connect us to generators. What makes living things go is inside them somehow. Her dark eyebrows drew together over her eyes. "What I mean is," she said finally, "something is going on that we don't understand. They say the builders made the city, but who made the builders? Who made us? I think the answer must be somewhere outside of Ember." "In the unknown regions? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know." She brushed her hands together in a time to get back to work way. So this is kind of interesting because what Clary is hinting at is an idea that all people ponder at some point, right? The idea that who made us? Why are we here, right? So she's questioning existence and where the answers may be. And so this is a really deep thought, and it's something that Lena really hasn't expressed to us before now. So it's giving Lena something new to think about, right? Clary is showing her that there's more to consider than just what's at the face value of things, right? Clary said Lena quickly, "Here's what I think." Her heart sped up. She hadn't told anyone this before. "In my mind, I see another city." Lena watched to see if Clary was going to laugh at her or smile in that overly kind way, but she didn't. So Lena went on. "It isn't like Ember. It's white and gleaming. The buildings are tall and sort of sparkle. Everything is bright, not just inside the buildings, but all around them too, even in the sky. I know it's just my imagination, but it feels real. I think it is real." So under Lena, you're going to want to add that she thinks that this city is real. So this city that she's been imagining, that's white and gleaming, everything is bright, even in the sky. She believes in her heart of hearts that this is a real place. Clary said, And then she said, "Where would such a city be?" "That's what I don't know, or how to get to it. I keep thinking there's a door somewhere, maybe out in the unknown regions, a door that leads out of Ember, and then behind the door, a road." Clary just shrugged her shoulders. "I don't know," she said. "I have to get back to work, but here, take this." She handed Lena the bean seed, took a little pot from the shelf, scooped some dirt into it, and handed the pot to Lena. "Stick the bean in here and water it every day," she said. "It looks like nothing, like a little white stone, but inside it there's life. That must be sort of a clue, don't you think? If we could just figure it out. Lena took the seed in the pot. "Thank you," she said. She wanted to give Clary a hug, but didn't, in case it would embarrass her. Instead, she just said goodbye and raced back toward the city. So we're continuing with Lena's perspective, and we're going to see a little bit more about what's going on at home. And, keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully things will start to move in a good direction for these people. Chapter 5, on Night Street. Granny's mind was getting more and more muddled. Lena would come home in the evenings and find her rifling through the kitchen cupboards, surrounded by cans and jars with their lids off, or tearing the covers off her bed and trying to lift up the mattress with her skinny arms. "It was an important thing," she would say, "the thing that was lost." Well, as you and I know, she's looking for the directions. She's looking for the instructions. And she's right, it is important, but she does not know what she's looking for. And that's what's frustrating Lena, because for all she knows, her grandmother, as she says, is just getting muddled. She's getting confused, right? So if you don't know muddled, it's a good vocab word to grab. "But if you don't know what it was," said Lena, "how will you know when you found it?" Granny didn't try to answer this question. She just flapped her hands at Lena and said, "Never mind, never mind, never mind," and kept on searching. These days, Mrs. Murdo spent a great deal of time sitting by their window rather than her own. She would tell Granny she was just coming to keep her company. "I don't want her to keep me company," Granny complained to Lena. And Lena said, "Maybe she's lonely, Granny. Let her come." Lena rather liked having Mrs. Murdo around. It was like having her mother there. She wasn't anything like Lena's own mother, who had been quite a dreamy, absent-minded sort of person. Mrs. Murdo was mother-like in a quite different way. She made sure that they all ate a good breakfast in the morning, usually potatoes with mushroom gravy and beet tea. She lined up the vitamin pills by each person's plate and made sure they were swallowed. When Mrs. Murdo was there, shoes got picked up and put away, spills were wiped off of furniture, and Poppy always had on clean clothes. Lena could relax when Mrs. Murdo was around. She knew things would be taken care of. So under Mrs. Murdo, you can add that Lena relaxed when Mrs. Murdo was around because Mrs. Murdo handled everything, right? So if you want to get specific, she made sure that they took their vitamins. She made sure they ate a good breakfast. She made sure that things were picked up and put away, and that Poppy was always clean. So for Lena, this is a relief because over the past 2 or 3 years since her parents passed away, she's kind of been filling the void of being an adult. And as Granny's memory is declining, that weight is getting heavier on her shoulders. And Mrs. Murdo steps in and really makes Lena going to work possible. Every week, Lena, like all workers between age 12 and 15, had Thursday off. One Thursday, as she was standing in line at the Garn Square Market, hoping to get a bag of turnips for stew that night, she overheard a startling conversation between 2 people standing behind her. "What I wanted," said one voice, "was some paint for my front door. It hasn't been painted for years. It's gray and peeling, horrible. I heard a store over on Ninth Street had some. I was hoping for blue." "Blue would be nice," said the other voice wistfully. "But when I got there," the first voice continued, "the man said he had no paint, never had. Disagreeable man. All he had there were a few colored pencils." Colored pencils? Lena had not seen colored pencils in any store for ages. Once she had 2 red ones, a blue one, and a brown one. She'd used these for her drawing until they were stubs too small to hold. Now she had only 1 plain pencil left, and it was rapidly growing shorter. She longed to have colored pencils for her pictures of the imaginary city. She had a feeling it was a colorful place, though she didn't know what its colors might be. There were other things, of course, on which her money should be spent. Granny's only coat was full of holes and coming apart at the seams. But Granny rarely went out, Lena told herself. She was either at home or in her yarn shop. She didn't really need a new coat, did she? Besides, how much could a few pencils cost? She could probably get a coat for Granny and some pencils. So that afternoon, she set out for Night Street. She took Poppy with her. Poppy had learned how to piggyback ride. She wrapped her legs around Lena's waist and gripped Lena's throat with her small, strong fingers. On Budlow Street, people were standing in long lines with their bundles of laundry at the washing stations. The washers stirred their clothes in washing machines with long poles. In days past, the machines themselves had whirled the clothes around, but not one of them worked anymore. Lena turned up Hafter Street, where the 4 street lamps were still out and a building crew was repairing a partly collapsed roof. Orly Gordon called out to her from high on a ladder, and Lena looked up and waved. Farther on, she passed a woman with bits of rope and string for sale and a man pulling a cart full of carrots and beets to the grocery stores. At the corner, a cluster of little children played catch with a rag ball. The streets were alive with people today. Moving fast, Lena threaded her way among them. But as she went into Otterwell Street, she saw something that made her slow down. A man was standing on the steps of the gathering hall, shouting and howling, and a crowd of people had gathered around him. Lena went closer, and she saw who it was. Her insides gave a lurch. It was Sage Merrill. His arms flailed wildly, and his eyes were stretched wide open. In a high, rapid voice, he wailed out a stream of words. "I have been to the unknown regions," he cried. "There is nothing there. Did you think something out there might save us? Ha! There's only darkness and monsters, darkness and deep, terrible holes, darkness forever. The rats are the size of houses. The rocks are as sharp as knives. The darkness sucks your breath out. No hope for us out there. Oh, no. No hope. No hope." He went on like this for a few minutes and then crumpled to the ground. The people watching him looked at each other and shook their heads. "Gone mad," Lena heard someone say. "Yes, completely." So his trip seems to have robbed Sage of his sanity. And so, he's trying to warn people. But if you look at the details of what he's saying, they're not exactly accurate. Remember, he said there was nothing out there when he was talking to Clary. He had heard rumors about rats the size of garbage cans. But now all of a sudden he's telling people he had seen rats the size of houses. Which, if it's completely black out there, you're not seeing rats the size of anything. So this goes to show you that in Sage's mind, what was fantasy and what was rumor and what actually happened to him have kind of gotten mixed. And so he's really not speaking in a way that's logical, sensical, or even accurate. Suddenly, Sage sprang up again and resumed his terrible shouting. The crowd stepped back. Some of them hurried away. A few of them approached Sage, speaking in calming voices. They took him by the arms and led him, still shouting, down the steps. "Who dat? Who dat?" said Poppy in her small, piercing voice. Lena turned away from the miserable spectacle. "Hush, Poppy," she said. "It's a poor, sad man. He doesn't feel good. We mustn't stare." So if you don't know what a spectacle is, that's a great vocab word to grab. Okay, but if everybody's looking at it, it's a spectacle. She headed toward Night Street, which ran along Greengate Square. There, a stringy-haired man sat cross-legged on the ground playing a flute made out of a drain pipe, and 5 or 6 believers circled him, clapping and singing. "Soon, soon, coming soon," they sang. What's coming soon? Lena wondered, but she didn't stop to ask. 2 blocks beyond, she came to a store that had no sign in its window. This must be the one, she thought. At first, it looked closed. Its window was dark. But the door opened when she pushed on it, and a bell attached to its doorknob clanked. From the back room came a black-haired man with big teeth and a long neck. "Yes," he said. Lena recognized him. He was the one who had given her the message for the mayor on her very first day of work. His name was Hooper. No, Looper. That was it. "Do you have any pencils for sale?" she asked. It seemed doubtful. The shop shelves were empty except a few stacks of used paper. Poppy squirmed on Lena's back and whimpered a little. "Sometimes," said Looper. Poppy's whimper became a wail. "All right, you can get down," Lena said to her. She set her on the floor where she tottered off unsteadily. "What I'd like to see," said Lena, "are your colored pencils, if you have any." "We have a few," said Looper. "They are somewhat expensive." He smiled, showing his pushy teeth. "Could I see them?" He went into the back room and returned a moment later carrying a small box which he set down on the counter. He took off the lid. Lena bent forward to look. Inside the box were at least a dozen colored pencils. Red, green, blue, yellow, purple, orange. They had never even been sharpened. Their ends were flat. They had erasers. Lena's heart gave a few fast beats. "How much are they?" she said. "Probably too much for you," the man said. "Probably not," said Lena. "I have a job." "Good, good," the man said, smiling again. "No need to take offense." He picked up the yellow pencil and twirled it between his fingers. "Each pencil," he said, $5. $5? For 7 you could buy a coat. It would be an old patched coat, but still warm. "That's too much," Lena said. He shrugged and began to put the lid back on the box. "But maybe," Lena's thoughts raced. "Let me look at them again." Once more the man lifted the lid, and Lena bent over the pencils. She picked one up. It was painted a deep, clear blue, and on its flat top was the blue dot of the lead. The pink eraser had a shiny metal collar. So beautiful. "I could buy just one," Lena thought. "Then I could save a little more and buy Granny a coat next month." "Make up your mind," said the man. "I have other customers who are interested if you aren't." "All right, I'll take one." "No, wait." It was like a hunger, what she felt. It was the same as when her hand sometimes reached out by itself to grab a piece of food. It was too strong to resist. "I'll take 2, she said, and a faint dazzly feeling came over her at the thought of what she was doing. "Which 2? The man said. There were more colors in that box of pencils than in all of Ember. Ember's colors were all so much the same: gray buildings, gray streets, black sky. Even the colors of people's clothes had faded from use to mud green or rust red or gray blue. But these colors, they were as bright as leaves and flowers in the greenhouse. Lena's hand hovered over the pencils. "The blue one," she said, "and the yellow one. No, the man made an impatient noise in the back of his throat. "The green one," she said. "I'll take the blue and the green." She lifted them out of the box. She took the money from the pocket of her coat and handed it to the man, and she put the pencils in her pocket. They were hers now. She felt a fierce, defiant joy. She turned to go, and that was when she saw that the baby was no longer in the store. "Pappy!" she cried. She whirled around. "Did you see my little sister go out?" she asked the man. "Did you see which way she went?" He shrugged. "Didn't notice," he said. Lena darted into the street and looked in both directions. She saw lots of people, some children, but no Poppy. She stopped an old woman. "Have you seen a little girl, a baby, walking by herself in a green jacket with a hood?" The old woman just stared at her with dull eyes and shook her head. "Poppy!" Lena called. "Poppy!" Her voice rose to a shout. Such a little baby couldn't have gone far, she thought. Maybe down toward Greengate Square, where there were more people walking around. She began to run. And then the lights flickered and flickered again and went out. Darkness slammed up in front of her like a wall. Ooh, that is a simile. Look at that. Whew. She stumbled, caught herself, and stood still. She could see absolutely nothing. Shouts of alarm came up and down the street, and then silence. Lena stretched out her arms. Was she facing the street or a building? Terror swept through her. "I must just stand still," she thought. "The lights will come on again in a few seconds. They always do." But she thought of Poppy alone in the blackness, and her legs went weak. I must find her. She took a step. When she didn't bump into anything, she took another step, and the fingers of her right hand crumpled against something hard. The wall of a building, she thought. Keeping her hand against it, she turned left a little and took another step forward. Then suddenly her hand touched empty air. This would be Deadlock Street. Or had she passed Deadlock Street already? She couldn't keep the picture of the streets clear in her mind. The darkness seemed to fill not just the city around her, but inside of her head as well. So this is a really nice description of panic. And that's what she's doing right now. She can't even remember exactly where she is or what direction she's facing. And in a situation of crisis, you can't panic. Not if you want to survive. And so right now she's trying to fight her own panic. And remember, courage is not the absence of fear. It's overcoming fear when you face it. Heart pounding, she waited. "Come back, Lights," she pleaded. "Please come back." She wanted to call out to Poppy, to tell her to stand still, not to be afraid. She would come for her soon, but the darkness pressed against her. She couldn't summon her voice. She could hardly breathe. She wanted to claw the darkness away from her eyes as if it were someone's hands. Small sounds came from here and there around her, a whimpering, a shuffling. In the distance, someone called out incoherently. How many minutes had gone by? The longest blackout ever had been 3 minutes and 14 seconds. Surely this was longer. She could have endured it if she had been on her own. It was the thought of Poppy, lost, that she couldn't stand. And lost because she had been paying more attention to a box of pencils. Oh, she'd been selfish and greedy. And now she was so sorry. She made herself take another step forward. But then she thought, what if I'm going away from Poppy? She began to tremble, and she felt the sinking and dissolving inside her that meant she was going to cry. Her legs gave way like wet paper, and she slid down until she was sitting on the street with her head on her knees, trembling, her mind a wordless whirl of dread. She waited. So her legs gave way like wet paper. It's another simile describing her experience. A wordless whirl of dread. It's a very nice alliteration there. But the bottom line is panic wins right now for Lena. An endless time went by. A moan came from somewhere to the left. A door slammed closed. Footsteps started and then stopped. Into Lena's mind floated the beginning of the worst question. What if the lights never? She squeezed her arms around her knees and made the question stop. Lights, come back, she said to herself. Lights, come back, come back. And suddenly they did. Lena sprang up. There was the street again, and the people looking upward with their mouths hanging open. All around, people started crying or wailing or grinning in relief. Then all at once, everyone started to hurry, moving fast toward the safety of home in case it should happen again. Lena ran toward Greengate Square, stopping everyone she passed. Did you see a little girl walking by herself just before the lights went out? Green jacket with a hood? But no one wanted to listen to her. On the B Street side of the square stood a few people, all talking at once and waving their arms. Lena ran up to them and asked her question. They stopped talking and stared at her. How could we have seen anyone? The lights were out, said Nammy Proggs, a tiny old woman whose back was so bent that she had to twist her head sideways to look up. Lena said no. She wandered away before the lights went out. She got away from me. She may have come in this direction. You have to keep your eye on a baby, Nanny Proggs scolded. Babies need watching, said one of the women who had been singing with the Believers. But someone else said, oh, a toddler, green jacket? And he walked over to the open shop door and called, you have that baby in there? And through the door came someone leading Poppy by the hand. Lena dashed to her and lifted her up. Poppy broke into loud wails. You're all right now, said Lena, holding her tightly. Don't worry, sweetie. You were just lost a moment. Now you're all right. I've got you. Don't worry. When she looked up to thank the person who found her, she saw a face she recognized. It was Dune. He looked the same as when she had seen him last, except that his hair was shaggier. He had on the same baggy brown coat he always wore. She was marching up the street by herself, he said. No one knew who she belonged to, so I took her into my father's shop. She belongs to me, Lena said. She's my sister. I was so afraid when she was lost. I thought she might fall and hurt herself or be knocked over. And anyway, thank you so much for rescuing her. Anyone would have, said Dune. He frowned and looked down at the pavement. Poppy had calmed down and was curled up against Lena's chest with her thumb in her mouth. And your job? How is it? Lena asked. The pipe works? Dune shrugged his shoulders. All right, he said. Interesting anyway. She waited, but it seemed that was all he was going to say. Well, thank you again, she said. She hoisted Poppy around her back. Lucky for you, Dune Harrow was around, Nammy Proggs had said, who'd been watching them and gave her a sideways glare. He's a good-hearted boy. Anything breaks at my house, he fixes it. She hobbled after Lena, shaking a finger at her. You'd better watch that baby more carefully, she called. You shouldn't leave her alone, the flute player added. I know, said Lena. You're right. When she got home, she put the tired baby to bed in the bedroom they shared. Granny had been taking an afternoon nap in the front room and hadn't noticed the blackout at all. Lena told her that the lights had gone out for a few minutes, but she didn't mention anything about Poppy getting lost. Later in her bedroom, with Poppy asleep, she took the 2 colored pencils from her pocket. They were not quite as beautiful as they had been. When she held them, she remembered the powerful wanting she had felt in that dusty store, and the feeling of it was mixed up with fear and shame and darkness. So we have guilt. We have guilt here that Lena's experiencing because she lost her sister. So definitely worth adding to the character chart for Lena that she accidentally loses Poppy and is distracted by, the feeling of independence she gets from purchasing something she wants for herself. Additionally, it's worth noting that Dune is the one who found the baby. So under Dune, you can say that he rescued Poppy and returned her safely to Lena. So with that, my dears, we are done with chapter 5. And next week, we'll do chapter 6 and 7. And I hope that if you have any questions, you will email me at lmartin@sufferincentral.org. See you soon. Bye.